In a quiet, close-knit town, the Collins family appeared to be a model of harmony and respectability. Daniel Collins, the older brother, was the dependable one, hardworking, driven, and married to Sarah, a warm-hearted woman who was the glue holding the family together. Mark Collins, Daniel's younger brother, was different, an introspective and sensitive man who often felt like an outsider in his own family. While Daniel managed the family business, Mark was a writer, more comfortable with books and ideas than running a store. From the moment Sarah entered their lives, Mark felt something shift within him, a longing he couldn't quite define. Sarah was kind to Mark in a way that no one else in the family had been. She saw him for who he was, a dreamer, a deep thinker. There was a natural ease between them, a chemistry that neither could deny. At first, Mark chalked it up to nothing more than a harmless crush, something he could ignore. But as the months passed, his feelings grew stronger, harder to hide. He found himself yearning for her company, hanging on to her every word, and cherishing every smile she directed his way. He never intended to act on these feelings. He respected his brother and knew that crossing that line would mean betraying him. However, the heart has a way of defying reason. Sarah, too, began to notice the way Mark looked at her, the soft intensity in his eyes whenever they spoke, the way he seemed to listen more closely than anyone else. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but soon she started to feel a flutter in her chest whenever Mark was near. She found herself waiting for those moments when they would be alone together, even if just for a few seconds. The attraction was subtle at first, manifesting in the way they lingered in conversation, in the accidental touches, and the shared laughs that went on a bit too long. One evening, when Daniel had to leave town for a business trip, the tension between them reached a tipping point. Sarah was alone in the house, trying to keep herself occupied with household chores, but her thoughts kept drifting to Mark. That night, Mark decided to visit under the pretense of checking in on her. The conversation started innocently enough, small talk about the day, the weather, but soon the air between them thickened with unspoken desire. "Sarah, there's something I need to say," Mark began hesitantly, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and hope. "I know it's wrong, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel something for you." Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. She felt her heart pounding, both terrified and excited. "Mark, I feel it too, but we can't." But before she could finish, their lips met in a kiss that was both desperate and tender, a release of all the emotions they had been holding back. The kiss deepened, and soon they were wrapped in each other's arms, finding comfort in the forbidden. The room seemed to close in around them, the rest of the world disappearing in that stolen moment. When they finally pulled away, both of them were breathless, their minds reeling with the enormity of what had just happened. From that night on, their relationship shifted into dangerous territory. They would meet late at night after everyone was asleep in the guest room at the back of the house. Sometimes they'd sit by the window, sharing stories and dreams, their hands intertwined. Other nights, they would lay on the bed, the room illuminated by the soft glow of the moon, their bodies entwined as they whispered confessions and promises in the dark. Every moment was stolen. Every touch was charged with electricity. They knew they were playing with fire, but the passion was too intense to resist. One night, after an evening of quiet conversation that slowly turned to kisses and tender caresses, Sarah and Mark found themselves caught up in the heat of the moment. They made love quietly, their bodies moving together as if they had always belonged to each other. It was both beautiful and terrifying, the thrill of their forbidden love making it all the more intoxicating. They would spend hours afterward lying in each other's arms, talking about what could have been, what might still be if things were different. During the day, they had to act normal, careful not to let their secrets slip through the cracks. At family dinners, Mark would sit across from Sarah, stealing glances when he thought no one was looking. Sarah, too, became adept at hiding her feelings, laughing and smiling at Daniel's jokes, while her heart ached for the man sitting across from her. But secrets have a way of coming to light. One night, as Mark and Sarah were lost in each other's arms in the guest room, they were unaware that Daniel's mother, who lived with them, had woken up for a glass of water. As she passed the guest room, she noticed the faint light under the door and the unmistakable sound of whispers and soft laughter. Curiosity piqued. She peeked through the slightly ajar door and saw what she should not have, a sight that would change everything. She saw Sarah and Mark in a passionate embrace, their bodies tangled together on the bed. Shocked and horrified, she quickly backed away, her heart pounding. The next morning, unable to keep the secret, Daniel's mother confronted Sarah. "I saw you," she whispered with a trembling voice, tears streaming down her cheeks. "How could you do this? To Daniel? To this family?" Sarah, cornered and desperate, tried to explain, but there was no excuse that could justify the betrayal. When Daniel's mother threatened to tell Daniel, the gravity of their actions hit Sarah and Mark like a ton of bricks. The sense of impending doom was unbearable. Mark begged Daniel's mother for a chance to confess himself. "Please, let me tell him. He deserves to hear it from me, not like this." But Daniel's mother was too heartbroken and furious to listen. That very evening, as the family sat down for dinner, the tension was palpable. She couldn't hold it in any longer. She broke down in tears and revealed everything she had seen. Daniel's face turned ashen, his hands trembling as he processed what his mother had just said. He turned to Sarah, his voice barely a whisper. "Is it true?" His eyes were filled with a mix of disbelief, betrayal, and pain. Unable to lie anymore, Sarah nodded, tears spilling down her face. "I'm so sorry, Daniel. I never meant for it to happen." Mark tried to speak, but Daniel cut him off with a look that could freeze fire. "You? My own brother? How could you?" His voice shook with rage, his hands clenched into fists. The weight of the betrayal felt like a knife to the heart. The family dinner descended into chaos. Words were shouted, tears were shed, and years of trust were shattered in an instant. Daniel, heartbroken and unable to stay under the same roof, stormed out of the house, leaving Sarah and Mark to face the ruins of what they had done. Daniel's mother wept openly, and Mark could see the disappointment and hurt in her eyes. Days passed, and the family struggled to pick up the pieces. Daniel moved out temporarily, needing space to think and decide what to do next. Sarah, racked with guilt and shame, tried to reach out to him, but he wasn't ready to listen. Mark, too, tried to apologize, but his brother couldn't bear the sight of him. The Collins family, once a symbol of unity, was now divided, the cracks of betrayal too deep to mend. Meanwhile, the news spread through the small town like wildfire. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers began to whisper about the scandal. The story of Mark and Sarah became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of the consequences of unchecked desire. The weight of judgment from the outside world only added to their torment. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and Mark tried to come to terms with what they had done. Their love, once so passionate and all-consuming, now felt like a curse. They met one last time by the lake, the place where they had first dared to dream of something more. As they looked at each other, both knew that they couldn't continue like this. The cost had been too great. "Maybe, in another life, things could have been different," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Maybe," Mark replied, his voice choked with emotion. "But we have to live with the choices we've made." And so they parted ways, their love story ending not in happiness, but in heartbreak and regret. Mark left town, hoping to find a way to start over, away from the shadows of his past mistakes. Sarah stayed, trying to rebuild her life and hoping that one day Daniel might find it in his heart to forgive her. As for Daniel, he remained uncertain of what the future held. The wounds too fresh, the betrayal too deep. The Collins family was never the same again, forever marked by the choices of those who loved too deeply and acted too recklessly. The story of Sarah and Mark became a lesson in the high cost of hidden desires and the fragile nature of trust, leaving a scar that would take years to heal, if it ever could.